Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bureau of Reclamation webinar on recently published Post-2026 Colorado River Operations Pre-Scoping Comment Summary Report. Before we begin, we just have a couple of housekeeping items. If you're having technical issues, please disconnect and join again. And additionally, you may have a better success connecting to the Microsoft Teams app on your computer and not in the web browser. This event is being recorded. If you're not interested in being recorded, please disconnect at this time. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Carly Jurla. Carly is a Senior Water Resources Program Manager. Welcome, Carly.
Thank you, Patience, and thanks to all of you who have joined us here today. Last Friday, on January 27th, Reclamation published our pre-scoping comment summary report. In today's webinar, we will describe the content of the pre-scoping summary report, which again was posted last Friday, and that's up on our Post-2026 website. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide an overview of the layout and the content in the report, and the report is intended to summarize and reflect the public input we received in response to our June Federal Register notice, which we will give some background on. On today's webinar, we will not be discussing specifics regarding the design, content, or timing for the post-2026 process. There will be future opportunities for these discussions. And so to that end, there will not be a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. If you have any questions on the comments or inputs summarized here today, we encourage you to both read our report and to also review those letters and input that was submitted. All of it is available on our website. If you do need to communicate with us during this webinar, you can submit a question through the Teams chat box. And if there are comments related to general clarifications or the information presented here today, we will try and address those at the end of the webinar. So thank you for your time and interest in these critical matters. In today's webinar, we will start out by providing some general background on the post-2026 process and on the pre-scoping Federal Register notice. By pre-scoping, we mean the period that precedes a notice of intent to initiate the formal NEPA process, which traditionally starts with scoping. We will then cover the report itself, first summarizing who we heard from, the organization of the report, and then a thematic summary of the comments and the input received. For the purposes of this report, for shorthand and efficiency, we use the term stakeholder to group the input received. We fully recognize that sovereign entities included in this grouping have a different legal status in the basin, and we use this term as an editorial shorthand only. Presenting with me today are two members of the Post-2026 team, Amanda Erath, who is the Post-2026 Program Coordinator, and Logan Callahan, who is part of the research and modeling team supporting the Post-2026 process, and both have contributed significantly to the development of this report. Several reservoir management and decisional documents that govern the operation of Lake Powell and Lake Mead expire at the end of 2026. Those include the 2007 interim guidelines, which were adopted in 2007, Minute 323 to the 1944 treaty with Mexico, that was adopted in 2017, and then the 2019 Colorado River Drought Contingency Plans, which were adopted in 2019. Those agreements were all adopted in sequence to respond to the changing hydrologic conditions. The post-2026 process is intended to develop the successor domestic agreements, which will be implemented in 2027. underscore domestic there. The successor agreements to Minute 323 with Mexico will be conducted through a separate process with the International Boundary and Water Commission. I also wanted to take a moment to note and describe a parallel ongoing process, which was initiated in November of last year. The department initiated a notice of intent to prepare a supplemental environmental impact statement for the 2007 interim guidelines. This was initiated due to the critically low reservoir conditions and the potential for worsening drought that could result in unacceptable risks for Lake Powell and Lake Mead operations. That process is aimed at modifying operations for 2023 to 2024 and may also inform potential operations for 25 and 26. It does not interfere with, supplant, or supersede the post-2026 process. That process is more of a near-term, focused on near-term operations, while the post-2026 process is focused on the long-term operations. In June of last year, the department published our pre-scoping Federal Register notice in advance of initiating the NEPA process. The purpose of the notice was to receive input on the process and substance of those post-2026 operations prior to formally initiating that NEPA process. Our intention was to seek input and encourage brainstorming prior to that process so we could use it to shape that process. And we intend to initiate that formal process early this year and are working to define precisely what that timing looks like in consideration of the ongoing supplemental environmental impact statement that I previously mentioned, that schedule, trying to minimize the public and stakeholder burden of tracking and engaging both of those efforts. Once again, on Friday of last week, we published a summary report describing and summarizing the input we received in response to the Federal Register notice. This report does not represent any department or reclamation decisions regarding the post-2026 process. It summarizes the input that we received, and this came in through over 50 letters representing 80 basin partners, including 11 tribal letters, and we also received over 140 unique letters from concerned citizens. A rough breakdown by geographic location that we'll look at in a little more detail in the coming slides. About 33% of those comments and input came from entities in the lower basin, 15% in the upper basin, and roughly 7% outside of the basin. These graphics provide a summary of the groups, the basin partners and stakeholders, along with their geographic locations. The appendix to the report provides detail on which entity was mapped into each sector, so you can get a little bit of a deeper understanding there. In total, almost a third of the input received through the various letters came from tribes or tribal entities. And overall, the entities and sectors that responded reflect a very wide range of commenters. From a location standpoint, looking at that graphic on the right, the most basin partners and stakeholders were Arizona-based, and with the second most being basin-wide entities, mostly comprised of NGOs. We also had a diverse range from unique citizens that commented to the Federal Register notice, some international, and again, with the most commenters being Arizona-based. Lastly, before I turn it over to Logan, I wanted to reiterate that when we published the Federal Register notice back in June and we had our public webinar, We reiterated that we were interested in receiving specific recommendations that could be potentially initiated into the NEPA process for post-2026. We definitely received specific comments. I want to thank all of the commenters, folks who provided input. There were many commonalities. Logan and Amanda are going to talk through some more, but one commonality is that they were all thoughtful and for the most part very specific. We are very much pleased and also humbled by all the ideas and the expertise that are out there, and we genuinely appreciate all of your input. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Logan, who's going to start talking through some of the detail in the report.
Thank you, Carly. So in terms of the organization of the report contains separate summary sections of the comments received from stakeholders, tribes, and citizens. Each summary section is grouped by a prevalent theme. There is also a follow-up section that provides a summary of the common themes found across all comment letters, as well as a brief comparison of the different types of comments received from these groups. For example, this section highlights the similarities and differences between the strategy-oriented comments received from the stakeholders, tribes, and citizens. There is also a next steps section that outlines the next steps in the post-2026 process. In general, the formal process is anticipated to begin in early 2023 with the publication of a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. Sorry, technical difficulty. To prepare the environmental impact statement in the Federal Register. Additionally, Reclamation is currently taking steps to finalize the technical framework that will support the post-2026 process and is actively working to bring partners and stakeholders together to assist in their understanding of these technical approaches that Reclamation will be using in this post-2026 process. So in terms of the prevalent themes, we noted that the comments within the report are summarized by common themes. The prevalent themes identified in the stakeholder and tribal comment letters include process-oriented themes that identify the mechanisms that can be taken to help define the NEPA process to ensure a wide range of basin partners, stakeholders, and the general public can meaningfully engage and participate in the development of the post-2026 operational strategies. Specific process-oriented themes include stakeholder engagement and public involvement, as well as the NEPA process. In addition to the process-oriented themes, we also identified strategy-oriented themes, and these themes encompass the substantive elements and strategies recommended for consideration in post-2026 operations and in the upcoming NEPA processes. Specific strategy-oriented themes include the purpose and need, sustainable, reliable, and adaptive management, technical framework, operational strategy, resource analysis, environmental concerns, scope, policy and governance, as well as equity. The prevalent themes identified in the citizen comment letters include water efficiency, infrastructure, demand management, legal and policy considerations, operational strategies, education and information sharing, as well as energy production. So we'll provide a brief overview, a high-level overview of the stakeholder and tribal, partner stakeholder and tribal input as these relate to the themes we just presented. So Reclamation received many comments related to stakeholder and public involvement and outreach for the post-2026 process. In general, the output reiterated the need for an outreach process that is accessible, inclusive, transparent, timely, and collaborative. Stakeholders also recommended that Reclamation clearly defines what a transparent process looks like. In terms of collaboration and inclusivity, the stakeholders recommended Reclamation earnestly consider and incorporate, as appropriate, the values and ideas of a diverse range of basin partners, stakeholders, and the public. Additionally, it was recommended that Reclamation develops a technical framework and process that fosters and encourages collaboration among a subset of interconnected parties. This includes improved two-way communication and a building of basin-wide relationships and trust. Throughout the stakeholder and tribal letters, there was a resounding consensus advocating for increased tribal participation in the post-2026 process. Recommendations here included, but are definitely not limited to, inviting tribes to participate directly in federal-state negotiations, establishing regularly scheduled meetings, meaningfully considering, integrating, and responding to tribal input, and initiating government-to-government consultation with tribes early in the process. Moving on to the NEPA process, we got a lot of recommendations to help guide the formal NEPA process. Specifically, it is recommended that Reclamation develops overarching principles to help inform the process and explicitly defines and limits the scope of the NEPA process. It's worth noting here that some stakeholders recommended the scope include upstream storage. Others prefer a narrower scope focused solely on Powell and Meade operations, while others prefer a hybrid approach that considers specific upstream storage units in conjunction with Powell and Meade operations. Other NEPA process recommendations include extending the time for public participation beyond the minimum NEPA requirements, establishing an expiration date for the new guidelines, and collaborating with or enabling engaged stakeholders to explore a broad, creative range of alternatives, as well as developing a preferred alternative that incorporates multiple viewpoints. Moving on to our strategy-related themes, the purpose and need comments recommended that Reclamation shifts away from focusing primarily on existing water availability, Lake Powell and Lake Meade operations, and maximizing diversions, and instead recommended defining the purpose and need for the formal NEPA process in a more holistic and proactive way. The sustainable and adaptive and reliable management comments iterated the need to stabilize the system, utilize and establish long-term federal funding sources, create an adaptive, flexible, proactive rather than reactive framework, integrate developed, undeveloped, and unsettled tribal water rights, as well as increase system reliability. As noted in these comments, sustainable management depends on balancing consumptive uses and depletions with available supply. The unprecedented ongoing drought, coupled with low runoff conditions, underscores the need to reduce basin-wide consumptive uses and losses in order to stabilize the system, given the current natural supply conditions. This section here includes recommended strategies to equitably balance the system. In terms of the technical framework, and as outlined in the Federal Register notice, Reclamation recognizes the need for incorporating robust policies that withstand a broad range of future conditions and are not based on a single set of assumptions about water supply and demand. Given this, Reclamation was particularly interested in comments focused on planning under deep uncertainty, data integration, and the approaches to both modeling and the technical framework. More specifically, many stakeholders commented on the need for modeling and analyses to include realistic, transparent, and agreed upon data, with a focus on consumptive uses and losses data, demand estimates, as well as hydrology. We also had multiple stakeholders urge Reclamation to design the technical framework with diverse perspectives in mind, with an emphasis on integrating traditional indigenous knowledge and sources. In terms of our operational strategies, stakeholders provided a myriad of comments focused on operational strategies, considerations for developing future operations, and proposed future operations. Specific recommendations for future operations included integrating alternative triggers in operational release strategies, developing different shortage criteria, modifications to existing infrastructure, reservoir recovery, reduced use, DROA operations, water banking and market-related strategies, augmentation and exchanges, as well as recreational and environmental considerations. Other strategy-oriented comments included resource analysis with an emphasis on understanding the impacts to social, cultural, and environmental resources, as well as tribal assets. Example recommendations include integrating spiritual and cultural values associated with water into the scope of the environmental investigation, preserving national historic resources, and understanding the impacts of developed, undeveloped, and unsettled tribal water rights. Many comments here also emphasize the importance of fully understanding operational impacts on hydropower production. The environment was also a prevalent theme highlighted in the stakeholder letters. Many stakeholders emphasized the need for Reclamation to understand how Colorado River operations and alternatives impact, but are not limited to, watershed and tributary health, fish and wildlife, and ecosystems in the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River Delta, and the Salton Sea. In general, these comments recommended the post-2026 operational alternatives address water quality and temperature concerns, as well as issues regarding high-risk non-native species, provide greater environmental flow buffers, and integrate resilient strategies for nature, fish and wildlife, as well as the broader environment. We also had many stakeholders provide comments focused on the scope of the NEPA process, including the geographic scope, and suggestions for what should and should not be included in the NEPA process, as well as recommendations for establishing and integrating parallel processes. In terms of the geographic scope, some stakeholders recommended expanding the scope beyond the operations of Hoover and Glen Canyon dams. For example, including federal water projects that are either interconnected and/or dependent on the Colorado River Basin. We also had stakeholders provide a variety of comments focused on policy and governance. In terms of existing laws and policies, stakeholders expressed the need for the post-2026 operations to either be anchored in or build upon the current legal framework. Some recommended creating a framework in which the allocations across the basin, including Mexico, are based on percentages of available water rather than static volumes. Stakeholders also underscored the need for equitable policies and governance. Examples include considering the impacts of climate change and the associated legal implications, identifying and addressing traditional governance and institutional barriers that prevent tribes from resolving outstanding claims, fully utilizing recognized rights, and obtaining full access to clean drinking water, and fully understanding the primary and ancillary impacts associated with reduced entitlements. There were also a handful of recommendations for aligning federal support and operations with state and local policies and initiatives. Lastly, equity was an important theme in the stakeholder comments. These comments focused on the need for equitably to equitably distribute the impacts of reduced use and shortages among all users, accounting for commitments to tribes, economic sectors, and geographic locations. It's also noted here that any operational benefits need to be equitably shared. I would like to reiterate that this was a very high-level summary of the stakeholder comments in the report, and the report provides a more in-depth, comprehensive summary. With that, I will pass it over to Amanda to provide an overview of the tribal and citizen comments.
Thanks, Logan. So as both Carly and Logan have mentioned, Reclamation received numerous comments from Basin Tribes. Reclamation received letters from 11 individual Basin Tribes, which you can see listed here. 7 of these tribes are located in the lower basin, while 3 are in the upper basin, and 1 tribe covers both the lower and the upper basin. So while the tribal comments were included in many of the themes that Logan already discussed, there were also some tribal comments that are focused on considerations that are unique to tribes that we wanted to highlight. And some of these, as I said, have been discussed, but a few to highlight here are the federal trust responsibility to fully protect current and future tribal water rights, including tribal water rights that are not part of settlements yet. That was a recurring theme in the tribal comments that we received. Another prominent theme was the importance of the active inclusion of tribes in the decision-making process while decisions are being made instead of after the fact. Another comment that we received from numerous tribes was leveraging existing tribal forums. Some examples would include the Colorado River Basin Tribal Information Exchange, the 10 Tribes Partnership, and the Intertribal Council of Arizona, and the importance of those existing groups that can be leveraged as part of the post-2026 process. Next is to provide technical assistance to tribes throughout the process. And then lastly, as Logan touched on already, another comment that we saw was that to integrate and protect cultural resources, the health and safety of tribal communities, incorporating Indigenous knowledge into the process, and protecting the inherent value of the river. Reclamation also received a number of citizen comments, as Carly mentioned. We divided these comments based on themes, as we did for the stakeholder comments, but the themes were slightly different in the citizen input that we received. Comments received from the citizens did include some overlap with the stakeholder and tribal themes, but they were more focused on specific strategies. And therefore, we have organized these strategies by theme, and I will walk through each one briefly. First up is water efficiency. We did receive a number of comments focused on different types of water efficiency efforts that could be put into place. Some examples would include the reduction of potable water use for municipal irrigation. There were also a number of comments focused on increased agricultural efficiency, either through the use of more water efficient irrigation techniques or through other efforts such as using crops that are not as water intensive. There were also a number of comments focused on reducing or eliminating non-essential water uses. Some examples of those that were identified in comments were uses such as pools or fountains or water features. The next theme that we received numerous comments on from citizens were different comments related to infrastructure. Infrastructure included many different types of suggestions or recommendations. There were a number of comments focused on importing water from other basins or water bodies. Examples from the comments included importing water from the Columbia River Basin, the Missouri River Basin, the Mississippi River, or the Great Lakes. Some comments suggested importing that water through the use of pipelines, while others suggested the use of existing natural water bodies. Infrastructure comments also included recommendations regarding desalination and increased desalination. Both coastal desalination and inland desalination were included in comments. Also included in infrastructure were new dams and reservoirs that could be developed within the basin, as well as the removal of dams or the implementation of bypass tunnels. Next, which is somewhat related to water efficiency, the next theme is demand management. There were a number of comments focused on demand management, including suggestions such as implementing growth guidelines, specifically related to growth in development in different municipal areas. Pricing structures such as tiered structures, where water users who have higher rates of use would have a tiered pricing structure and would therefore pay higher rates. Restrictions on inefficient water use, as well as restricting or prohibiting certain agricultural uses within the basin. Similar to our stakeholder comments, we also received a number of comments focused on operational strategies. These included managing the basin in its entirety as a single system. So similar to what Logan discussed, the idea of including more of the infrastructure within the basin and managing it as a single system. Addressing seepage losses in different parts of the basin, as well as operating to match releases to inflows. There were a number of other suggestions as well that you can read in the report, but that's just to capture a few of them. Next up, we did receive comments related to energy production. Both Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam produce hydropower, and therefore we did receive comments focused on the production of hydropower. They went two different directions, as we saw with some of the other comments. Some commenters suggested that all necessary action should be taken to protect hydropower production, whereas other commenters suggested that we should replace or supplement hydropower production with other power sources so that water management would not be influenced by the power production at those dams. The next theme is legal and policy considerations. These are all comments focused on the legal or regulatory framework that dictates the management of the basin. So there were suggestions related to changes in Western water law and or the Colorado River Compact. There were comments related to the full adjudication of all tribal water rights within the basin, the promulgation of new water use regulations within the basin states. Some comments were focused on removing or expediting environmental restrictions that would speed the implementation of water projects, and then also increasing groundwater regulation. The last citizen theme was education and information sharing. We did receive a smaller number of comments focused on ways that Reclamation could, and the federal government as a whole, could increase information sharing through ideas such as increasing public awareness with public presentations, and then also publishing a regular report outlining the current state of the basin. So as we mentioned, the report includes a summary section here where we did try to summarize some big picture takeaways across all the groups of comments. Obviously, there's some overlap among all the groups who submitted comments, but some things to note are that we did receive many more process-oriented comments from stakeholders and tribes, whereas the citizen comments tended to be more focused on specific solutions and strategies. Some of the ones we've already discussed, things like water conservation and efficiency, transbasin importation, and water use regulations were very prevalent themes within the citizen comments. The stakeholder strategy comments tended to provide big picture recommendations relating to operations of existing infrastructure. So, as Logan discussed, things along the lines of alternative triggers that could be used to manage the reservoirs and releases, and things like continuous release rule curves. Tribal strategy comments, while they included both process and specific strategy comments, as we noted, they were also focused on unique concerns such as the focus on cultural impacts, tribal water rights, both current and future, and the inherent value of the river. With that, we would like to thank you all very much for your time today and for your consideration of these important issues. We look forward to your involvement as we continue with the post-2026 process. Just a quick reminder that you can find the report on the Reclamation website on the Post-2026 webpage. The address is here on this slide for you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.